And this month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by Super Inframan, Allison Cook, and Eric Hervin. Thank you all so very much for your incredible support.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? Tonight I am joined by a returning David Metcalf.
Hey, how's it going?
And for the first time, Stephanie Quick.
Hi.
And David, I think you come on about once a year at this point.
Yeah, that is actually, because it was about a year ago again.
Yeah, with Cheryl Lee.
We're getting back to it. Yeah.
So, and you're down south, and Stephanie, you're off on the West Coast, not too far from some bad fires.
Well, not at the moment, thankfully, but yeah, I'm in the Napa Valley, and we've been beset by firestorms the last few years, so it's been exciting.
Oh, I thought you said there was something like half an hour away or so.
Yeah, it's not a firestorm. We have a vegetation fire, but we don't have the huge, hot, dry, 100-mile-per-hour winds making things crazy. So
that's always a plus. That's just terrifying to me, honestly.
Oh, it is. It's terrifying to all of us. Yeah, because one of the things that, we've seen a lot of footage come out of people fleeing these, mountain twisty roads with, everything's on fire, and people saying, why didn't they get out of there earlier? And the thing is that these winds are pushing these fires at such extreme speeds. You can have a fire just like blow up with unlimited oxygen to fuel it, and suddenly you're just engulfed within a very short amount of time, and you don't have any warning if it's happening right on top of you. So yeah,
that's wow. All right, so this show is actually your idea, Stephanie.
Guilty.
And it is a very good idea. It's something I've always supported with this stuff, and I don't see enough, which is the benefits of taking a more multidisciplinary approach to these sort of paranormal fringe type topics. Yeah,
I have been kind of pitching this type of idea around for a couple of years, and so I was real excited that you agreed to have me and David Metcalf on to talk about this. And I had training in anthropology when I was in college, and so they really drummed it into us, even though this is like a trillion years ago, but they really drum it into you, the whole idea of the multidisciplinary approach. There's various branches of anthropology, and none of them have the final word about what it means to be human, right? Yeah. They're all just different ways of looking at what it is to be human, right? And if you look at it from more than one angle, then you get more comprehensive view, you get greater insights, and you can use a wide variety of people. This is one of the things that I noticed in the whole kind of paranormal community is that we do have a certain amount of kind of, infighting, or people sniping, or people talking past each other, like, the nuts and bolts people are like versus the people that are looking at like the witness experience of, let's say, flying saucers.
Yeah.
But if you take a multidisciplinary approach, you realize that these are all aspects of the same phenomena. So if we come together and work together, we could help each other and have a more beneficial way of moving forward. So I thought it'd be fun to discuss this and some of the kind of different philosophical or technical terms around some of this stuff.
Well, and I've always been just blown away the fact that you have people studying Bigfoot or UFO, and they all think the other ones are ridiculous.
Yep.
It's like, ghosts are real, but Bigfoot, that's nonsense. It's like, what? And then you see the same sort of phenomena present, like the same sort of archetypal phenomena present in all of this stuff. You know, you see lights.
And a lot. And a lot of crossover too with witness testimony.
Exactly. You know, I got Tim Renner, you know, away from the flesh and blood Bigfoot thing, and he started asking people, did you have any weird sleep stuff? Did you see lights? And he's like, yeah, it's everyone. He's like, almost everyone I talk to has these other stories, but no one ever asked them because they're only looking for Bigfoot.
Yeah.
When I remember having Seth Breedlove on, and for one of his small town monsters movies, was it the Minerva? No, it was the one in New York State. I can't remember the name of it. But I said to him, I'm like, were there any UFO encounters? And he's like, well, we weren't really looking for that. I'm like, but do you know of any? And he goes, well, you know, I mean, a UFO did land on the lawn of the woman across the street from where the Bigfoot things were happening.
But other than that,
and I'm like, you didn't think maybe there was a connection there, you know?
Yeah, it's amazing. And there, you know, this used to be something that it wasn't as kind of separated out as it is today. I think that a lot of the, you know, kind of like the market niche that's developed in each topic has seemed to kind of really separate this out in the public consciousness. Because, I mean, if you look at magazines from like the 70s and stuff, you know, or even books like, oh man, I'm going to totally blank on her name, but it's a book it's just called Bigfoot, and it's from like 1975. And Tim Renner and Joshua Cutchin actually cite the book in their
that's right,
where the footprints end. And the book's literally just called Bigfoot, but I think B. Ann Slate is one of the co-authors. But it has a whole bunch of you know, kind of like multi-modality Bigfoot encounters, and looking at the topic in a much wider sphere than you would think, you know, today, with, you know, like you said, just the idea of someone's out looking for Bigfoot or looking for ghosts or whatever. There's that one even has a Men in Black kind of encounter related to the Bigfoot phenomenon. So
yeah, and Josh and Tim found a few of those type of Men in Black-ish wild men encounters that, you know, like, but where one of them looked almost like, instead of looking like an alien, looked almost like a wild man.
Yeah. Well, and this one, the one that I'm thinking of, one of the Bigfoot witnesses actually had like people knock on the door who asked for change for a phone call, and then ended up just kind of like walking away and disappearing into the, you know, disappearing into the background there.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was like a straight up, like kind of like classic, like Men in Black sort of knocking on your door, asking awkward questions. It not really seeming right, you know, and them just kind of disappearing. And that, you know, Nick Redfern just published a short piece on Mysterious Universe about Men in Black encounters with Loch Ness, which was real interesting. Yeah, so
that's fun.
Yeah.
Well, and then that has the whole aspect, because one of the things that I have been an advocate of for a number of years, I don't know that it's caught on much, but I've always been very interested, because one of the things that I like about a multidisciplinary approach is that you are bringing models to bear upon the subject matter. And it's always struck me that esoteric theories and systems, occult systems, they have models about how these things are supposed to happen and how they're supposed to work out, right? Mm-hmm. So you can then take those models and apply them onto these various phenomena and see if you find anything out, gain any insight. It seems like there's something to follow there. And Loch Ness, of course, that's fun that it had the Men in Black, because they had, who's the guy that did the ritual with the sky-clad witches to invoke the Loch Ness monster?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't hear
Doc
about
Shields.
that.
Doc Shields. Yeah, he actually ended up getting a photograph of the monster. And then, of course, a lot of people say, well, Uncle Al was there at a Boleskine house, and they think that maybe he stirred up the monster too. So it's kind of funny that you see like it's the Loch Ness monster, which is supposedly like a cryptid. But at the same time, you have this whole kind of occult, the idea that people are somehow evoking it. And then also the Men in Black stuff, which is classically associated with UFOs, flying saucers.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. There was something I was going to say. Now I don't know what it was.
I'm sorry about that.
It's okay.
Well, if you don't mind, if I give a little bit of a spiel on multidisciplinary, multimodal approaches to a particular subject or topic.
I know what I was going to say.
Oh, okay.
The other thing that I found really invaluable when dealing with all this stuff is understanding the way we perceive reality, psychology, and things like that, which a lot of people who research this stuff couldn't care less about. Which is why I keep pushing the Invisible Gorilla book, because it does such a good job of experimenting on the illusions we have about what we perceive, how we remember things, stuff like that. And when we're dealing with a lot of witness testimony, it's important to understand that stuff.
Well, it's funny because you just had, I think, Taylor Bell on recently.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he had approached me a while back about, because of course he has started a new podcast, which is delightful. And it's funny, I'm finding more podcasts these days, like Your Brain on Weird is another one where they're really interesting and nicely researched and everything, but they're also, they'd be great if you were going to go to sleep, because they're just kind of like relaxing, which sounds like an insult, but actually I think it's a high compliment. So, but we had been talking about doing a show about witness testimony because, like you're saying, a lot of people in the para-weird community get very frazzled and kind of at their wits' end with witness testimony because it's a special type of evidence, and it can be very fungible or difficult to deal with in a how do I say, disciplined, rigorous manner.
Yeah.
However, there's a lot of, in the legal field, forensically, psychology, there's all these disciplines that have looked at how we perceive, how you can use this testimony to help, for example, build a case legally or criminally. And so we were going to hopefully be doing a show in the next couple months on that whole aspect of things.
Cool.
Because the other thing about witness testimony that can be difficult is that, especially in a lot of high-strange events, people are in very altered states of consciousness.
Yep.
So the way that you perceive, let's say during your job or when you're out driving around in a car, could be very different. And it's difficult too because I remember reading this one account in an old-timey flying saucer book when I was in high school or something, or maybe in college. But they were talking about an experiment that had been done. They were shooting a missile off some military near the Canadian border. And so it was going to make this very visible object in the sky. And because they were setting it off themselves, then they would know, okay, this is the time when it started. This is how bright it got. This is the direction that was heading up in the sky. This is, how many arcs or degrees it achieved as far as the height. They had all those parameters.
Yeah.
So what they did was and it would be visible for like several hundred miles. So what they did was they called for anyone who'd seen something unusual in the sky on this night to contact them because they wanted to do some experiments or get some data on witness testimony, like you say. And it was ironic because, people really varied. And lots of times you'll give more weight to people who were calm during the event and present their testimony logically. But one of the people that had the most accurate testimony as far as, the brightness, duration, all that type of stuff, had actually been so freaked out. He was driving towards this object, toward this rocket, and he ended up throwing the car in reverse and driving backwards because it seemed like it was coming towards him. They're like screaming in this car. But he gave the most accurate testimony as far as all these, physical parameters. So, and some of the people who are just like very calm and very logical or just like blew it completely. So it makes it, yeah.
And that's kind of what they talk about in the Invisible Gorilla. Like there's one of the things they talk about is the illusion of confidence. Like if someone seems confident and stuff, that they're more likely to be believed than someone who doesn't seem confident but might be right.
Yep.
They did experiments where they sent people into two different doctors, one who immediately knew what was wrong with them and told them, and the other who stopped and looked a couple things up before diagnosing them, with the second doctor being the one that was right and the first one being wrong, and almost everyone said, I believe the first doctor.
Which is crazy, because for me, I've been to a lot of doctors in my life, and one thing that will earn me the trust of a doctor is if they say they don't know.
Yes, exactly.
Because there's a lot that we don't know.
But most people don't want that. They expect these people to be experts, and they just assume, if he sounds confident that he knows what he's talking about, he must be right.
Yeah, it's how do I say, being able to tolerate uncertainty was one of my discussion points that I put into my notes for this discussion, because it's important to be able to do that and to kind of keep track of what you do and don't know. But it can be very uncomfortable, especially when you've had like a really weird experience or something that you've been trying to figure out for decades and you're just not getting anywhere with it,
True. It was interesting because also missing data can make things look weird that aren't.
Yep.
But I was just watching the 1985 movie The Explorers, because I think it just got a Blu-ray release, and I got a copy of it, and I was like, man, I haven't seen this since I was a kid. I don't even remember it. And it's these kids who have this kid who keeps getting a dream about building this device, and they build it, and it creates this sort of bubble that they can actually get inside and like fly around in and stuff. And they build a little thing to sit in and stuff. So basically they create a UFO. Mm-hmm. And they're flying around town in it. There's all these UFO sightings, and this cop finds the stuff that they were flying around in without the bubble around it, and it's just amusement park thing, like a one of those teacup rides. And he's like, "Well, what the hell? This is just normal stuff." And it's like, yeah, if you don't have that missing component, and I'm thinking, this was done in '85. I'm sure it wasn't done. I mean, who knows? Maybe the people who made it had some concept of this, but if we had a report like, oh, people saw a UFO and then it just turned out to be this teacup ride, we'd be like, well, there's the trickster in action,
That is, this is another thing that I put in my notes because I'm a bird watcher. And one of the things that I like about ornithology is that the science community is very diverse, studying birds, and they work hand in glove very closely with hobby bird watchers as citizen scientists. But one of the things that struck me looking at this from the UFO angle is like no one, like the big disclosure or the big government authority coming to tell us about UFOs, like right, they have the crash saucer and the dead aliens, right?
Yeah.
No one thinks that you understand everything about a songbird if they, you have some poor murdered bird there. They show it to you. I mean, that shows you certain things about the physical body of that creature, but there's so much that has to do with the behavior, their migration, courtship, how they build their nests, their culture, the song.
True.
So many things that we, really speak to us and that we love about birds and are so captivating about them is just completely missing if you just have the dead body, right?
Yeah.
And
however,
that teacup is like the dead body. Yeah.
However, we don't argue about whether or not songbirds exist.
Most of them, no. A few of them.
Really? Okay.
The ivory-billed woodpecker, but that's something for another time.
David, do you have anything you want to input here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's an interesting thing about that teacup concept from the movie because, the pre-Kenneth Arnold 1946 UFO sighted over San Diego and Los Angeles, the Corrida, which Mark Probert and Meade Lane had reported on, and it was written up in some of the papers out there. They reported it as being made of balsa wood. Right.
Mm.
And so this pre-Arnold flying saucer, kind of fits that this idea that it wasn't this technological device. It was like a hang glider, right? But the description of it was that it was big enough to cover the moon at the time.
Wow.
And a more advanced multidisciplinary, but Mead Lane was using occult sciences and different sort of I don't know, I guess folks would say pseudoscientific, but sort of his own sort of scientific take, kind of a Fordian scientific take on it. And Mark Probert was a channeler, and so that's how they were getting their information on what this thing was and what it was called and that. But it's just, it kind of fits that model of, if we saw that now, right, like assuming that there was a balsa wood glider that was flying out there, it would be.
You think it was Greg Bishop?
Yeah, right. It would just be Greg Bishop flying in one of his ultralights.
Bishop.
But we would think of it, like some sort of, technological device that we could get metamaterials from and all the rest of it. But back, in 1946, it was described as being made of balsa wood, and that was that seemed right because no one had gone up into space, so maybe you could fly through space in a balsa wood glider.
Well, and every time we do find remnants from something, it's never these weird metamaterials. It's always really earthly stuff. It's almost like this stuff just constructs itself from the things around it.
It's like an apport or something,
Yeah.
Right. And I think, and in that way too, I mean, one of the things that I really, it becomes a heavy focus when I'm thinking about these topics, but like this holistic picture of it, I've been on Alan Steinfeld's weekly video cast that he's put together. It's been a series of panels each week talking about the kind of UFO question, and that based around his book Making Contact. And one of the things that like really has stood out with all the different people that have gone on there, because he's got experiencers from all over the place and researchers and that. But this idea that, we want the UFO or Bigfoot or ghost or whatever to be this thing, like this object. Mm-hmm. But really, what we're talking about is this holistic experience that has more to do with, just everything from the environment and from, it's not just this object that's out in space that you can point to. It's actually an experiential kind of phenomenological matrix of things, and that none of these things are just this thing,
Yeah.
I have been thinking about that a lot since I've been living here in Napa, because we've had these firestorms and we've also had flooding. And it was wild to me. We have the down where my mom used to live in the center of town. They built a flood project, and they have like they have like a greenway where the river can overspill the oxbow. And so we had flooding, and it's a valley. The south is open, but the rest of it is encased by mountains. And so you have all this rain that falls on the mountains, and it just comes down, and then it just starts filling up the whole valley like a bathtub. And I like to go downtown, and there is like a kind of by the river, there's like a bridge, and I like to go lurk under the bridge because the swallows and the swifts nest there, so I can watch them and commune with them and the homeless people under the bridge. But so I'm very familiar with this spot, and it really struck me. My mom and I went down when there was flooding, and it spilled over this overpass, and so you have this whole like blocks long and block wide place, and it's just like 12 feet deep, this raging flood water, and 24 hours before it wasn't there, and 24 hours after it's not there. It's a huge thing that's happening, and it could very well have like, psychic or emotional or other type of implications to it. But it really struck me how you can have this huge thing, and of course it deposited like a couple of feet of gravel and rock, which I knew because I could see, where I usually would stand. So it's like this huge physical, very physical event, but it's not a thing. It's not an object. And it made me wonder if, it's like a tornado, right? A huge physical, incredible, overwhelming happening, but it's not a thing the way that we think of things.
Right.
You can find, it's like with some of these UFOs, you'll find where it looks like there was like a huge weight pressed into the ground or something. But so I'm kind of thinking about some of these events as kind of like almost like weather happenings or something. But it sounds like these people are getting at a similar idea.
Yeah, and that fits in with the wave concept. I mean, that's one of the interesting things about this current sort of mediation of the UFO is that we really haven't had a wave.
Yeah.
You know? And in the past, like there's been actual noticeable waves that have affected the public, not just the military with, advanced equipment off on certain parts of the coast, but, actual whole regions have been swept by, UFO phenomena with attendant, humanoid
weirdness.
Yeah, the whole thing. And so one of the interesting things that's really fascinated me, I've been watching the Google Trends on the UFO topic, and it really hasn't, for all the media that's being pushed on this stuff, it hasn't shown up in Google Trends.
Huh.
There's been some like low spikes, like it's definitely having an effect. But in terms of like the overall interest of people searching UFO and engaging with that term, it was much higher in the Stephenville case in Texas in 2008, which was reported locally, right? Like it was a local reporter, Angelia Joyner, who came out with local reports on it, and then that spread to the mainstream news, and there was witnesses, and there was the whole deal, and people really got involved with that, and it came right on the tail of the O'Hare sighting, which really got people's attention. But the actual organic public interest on the current wave just is not showing up in the immediate data. There's been polls about people, like 43%, 47% think that it's, that they want to know what the UFO is and all the rest of this stuff. But polling data is way different than like actual analytics on what people are searching and what they're really doing, because you can ask them a poll question and they'll give you an answer, but that's not necessarily coffee. But so it's interesting because, it is kind of like a tornado or, like a weather phenomena that kind of sweeps over, and it just has these, sort of attendant things, which I guess is, in a way ties to, Charles Fort's study of, weird weather. And that is also tied in with the, UFOs and poltergeists and spontaneous human combustion and the rest of it.
And the O'Hare sighting too. I mean, that's a pretty phenomenal sighting. That was one of the few that the late Jeff Ritzman said he thinks was a completely genuine anomaly. Like doing the photo analysis and looking at all the data, that was one of the few he was willing to say that, this is genuinely weird.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, all I can think of to say at this point is like, that was weird. I remember. Well, I remember Jeff going through his analysis back then when it was happening, and it's like, that was weird.
Because it left a hole in the clouds. Lots of people saw it. It just sat there. It grounded planes. It wasn't something you could chalk up to someone's imagination.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So, and it's difficult too, because that's the type of thing that makes you wonder too about, I was talking with Wild Trees. He's a biologist, and he is interested in poltergeists and how you could possibly study them and doing like thought experiments, but also other stuff. And, it's so frustrating because he was saying, and I happen to agree with this, but it's just an opinion, but, we feel like there's a missing, there's going to be a technological breakthrough, right? Like with the microscope or the telescope, but we're not seeing something that's important about something that's going on. You see these definite recurring patterns that are pointing towards some type of mechanism, but I'm wondering, like, if there's a way of detecting, 3D patterns in electromagnetic fields over time or something resonating with each other, that like if you could figure that out, then it was like, oh wow, this all of a sudden this is making sense or something like that. Obviously I don't know, and I'm not in a position really to speculate either, but it doesn't prevent me from doing so.
No, and you should speculate. I mean, but to me, that all that stuff is like a web of things, Location plays a part, the people involved can play a part, psi is a part of it. There could be external spirits that are a part of it. Solar activity is probably a part of it. What the Earth is doing in response to other things is probably a part of it. So, I mean, some cases may just be spontaneous sigh and, people who are overly stressed, and that's how it's expressing itself. But then you have other cases that could have any number of these factors and look the same.
That's another thing that I'm seeing who's gotten at this. We're going down this path of rampant speculation. Another thing that, and I don't really know how to express this. This is partly why I wanted Metcalf to be on here so he can express my thoughts for me and make them sound smart. Not to put you on the spot, but I've been getting this feeling that one of my most influential books on me is Jeffrey Mishlov's The PK Man, Ted Owens. And he would manifest all type of crazy stuff, including like flying saucers, and not just like a tiny light in the sky, but like big old honking structured craft. And he would also teach other people how to do that. And I'm getting this sense that there can be, how do I want to say this? It's kind of like the UFO is a vehicle. And that type of vehicle or phenomenon could be used by groups of people. It could be used by a discarnate being. It, probably a swarm of bees could create a UFO if they had need to. Right. It's kind of like a manifestation of a certain quality of focused consciousness that has a certain directive goal to it of contact.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I've been looking at it more. It's kind of funny because it's like you're going away from the nuts and bolts phenomena, but then you're coming back to this thing. It's like, well, it's just kind of like a way. Like a means of getting something done or going someplace. So like a vehicle. I don't know if that makes any sense. And it's pure speculation, but I've just been getting more of this sense because there are these instances where these type of events have been precipitated by focused human consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the Bledsoe experience, right? Like Chris Bledsoe and his family have seen structured craft, but for the most, what Chris encounters are like plasma orbs. And it's really it really is interesting to see that mix, in the two things, and that's that's with the waves too, where you have all sorts of. I mean, if you go back and look at the casing, like the encounter cases that are written up, even within a wave in a region. The descriptions of what people are seeing can be drastically different,
Yeah.
And I think Vallee's highlighted that in a lot of cases where even in one instance where you have a group of people witnessing something, they'll describe a different craft,
Yeah.
Well, there's a classic case in Jenny Randall's book, Mind Monsters, and I'm constantly bringing this up, but there was and she talks about this kind of holistic approach of, she's kind of elucidating this idea that you have certain geological qualities in certain areas, and it interacts with kind of the cultural history of the place, as well as people that are in like emotional stress, physiological stress, and have kind of focused attention. But she talks about one instance where there were three young men who were out at night doing, I don't know what the heck they were doing, but they were out and about in the boonies someplace. And suddenly they encountered the unknown. Two of the guys just like started screaming and running away. And the third guy was there like, what? So the two guys that ran away saw like a big hairy monster with glowing red eyes. But the third guy just saw like the red glowing orb.
Right. And I've had a few experiences where I've been with a couple other people and myself and someone else experienced something and the third person didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, what's that? And the first, and anytime I have these experiences, I always look for like, what are you trying to show me? And, the first time that happened, I walked away with, we don't all see the same reality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that going back to the poltergeist concept, that was something that and William Roll from University of West Georgia, in his investigations of the poltergeist, he started looking heavily into geomagnetic anomalies and what the actual environment was like that people were in. And there did, from the research, there does seem to be sort of human consciousness, human physiology as the catalyst to sort of, in concert with the environmental effect.
Yeah.
Sort of manifest this stuff. And I think that, again, with the regional kind of thing, you think of someplace like Skinwalker Ranch, or, there's that place, I don't know the guy's name, but he's been talking about like the place in Alabama, and different sort of areas that are Sedona, right? Like that have this like, or the Hudson Valley, and there's at the University of Georgia again, recently, there's actually a graduate student in the psychology department who's doing a study of quartz crystals in the ground, geomagnetic anomalies, and time slip phenomena.
Yeah.
There's a coordinated thing, and that David Mitchell is the professor who's overseeing that graduate project. But to correlate that and sort of figure out, like, are these things, if we have this time slip phenomena being reported, is there some correlation with the environment, associated with quartz deposits and geomagnetic anomalies in that? And I think that and this kind of holism is where this idea of a multidisciplinary approach comes in, because you really, you can't come from any one angle and get a full perspective on what's going on,
Yeah. I'm glad somebody's finally doing that.
Yeah, it's really exciting. University of West Georgia, for a number of years, has been looking a lot at some of the implications of Persinger's work. So Christine Simmons Moore, who's a psychology professor there, has been doing studies of the God helmet and the God helmet idea in terms of apparitional encounters and trying to replicate some of Persinger's work. And so now David Mitchell is doing this with the time slip phenomena and the geomagnetism. And so they've been doing, and then, and again, that also kind of bridges over into what William Roll was doing with the poltergeist stuff. So it's really cool to see that at an actual, at an institution that has the resources to kind of do it over a long term,
Yes.
Yeah, because that's the other thing is that, there's not like a huge amounts of money and resources to study a lot of this stuff. And so I think sometimes if people can appreciate more that if, someone may be doing something different from you or from a different angle, that this can actually be beneficial, because, if people can all do their little bits, even just on an amateur level, or then, we can all start to get more of this big picture, as opposed if everyone's kind of chasing after the same thing, it may be confirming, but then, there'll be other parts of the picture that get left out.
I think that prior to the show here, Stephanie, you'd been talking about citizen science. And I think that that's really where it's so important to have well-trained, focused citizen science.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that really frustrates me with a lot of the popular paranormal stuff is that it leans towards commercialization and marketing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't lean towards actually training people to do real research that they can do. And, in the past, like the Lorenzens were amazing in being able to coordinate groups of citizen scientists and take their data and bring that together, and analyze it and codify it. And that, APRO was an amazing example of the possibility of that, to the point where, early on Project Blue Book and even in the Condon report and stuff, they were being asked to come in and, act as kind of consultants for that. And writing about it too, in a way of being like, well, this is what we see wrong with what's going on with Blue Book, or what we see going wrong with the Condon Report. But nowadays we have like ghost hunting shows, and we have Bigfoot shows, and the actual science and stuff is almost there as a performative element, especially with the ghost hunting stuff, where the idea of like bringing like measuring the electronic field, electromagnetic field in an environment becomes like a stunt more than it is actually, using it for the reason that it's there for, which is to see if, if there's some sort of bad wiring in the house or something. Right. And I think that's maybe cleaned up a little bit recently, but there's still this element of like, the night vision shots and the rest of it, where it's not the science.
Well,
because just from the birding angle, like you're saying, you can develop these tools that people can use so that your data is more systematized. You have a more systematic approach towards asking people proper questions. Because if everyone's just doing their own thing and kind of doing what they want, it makes the data a lot less useful. Yeah. Whereas if you have things that are standard, I mean, like birding, it's like, just teaching people how to identify the birds, how to count them, what their names are. There's been a convention of naming in bird watching to make it so that the names are easy to remember. Each species has a unique name. So it is unique to the species, so it's useful from a scientific angle, but they have made a very conscious decision that it's going to be, a common name, like oak titmouse or plain titmouse or chestnut-backed chickadee. So it's not these Latin things, but you can still get that same level of granularity and specificity. So a lot of it is creativity, but like you're saying, you have to educate people, you have to have these tools, and like you say, it is frustrating, even from the UFO angle. I remember reading like some of Vallee's works from like the 70s or 80s, and he's talking about tools like Key that you can use to talk through a person's light in the sky sighting to see if it, is it Venus, is it a plane, is it, to rule out kind of the common identifications. Because even today you'll find people talking about UFO, and then you have to go back, oh, well, do you mean all the reports of someone who had, seen, a bottle rocket that their neighbor lit off and they were drunk, so they misidentified it to, full-on flying saucer in the front yard? Everything people are like, oh, no, well, you mean the stuff that's been actually, it's like we haven't even got that far in all this time.
The problem with also the ghost hunting groups in particular is that they're like, well, we're approaching this scientifically. And it's like, no, you're not. You're approaching it with the concept of, you believe ghosts are real. How can we prove it? That's not scientific, and they don't quite get that.
Yeah. And there tends to be using anything technological, anything that runs on a battery as a proxy for the scientific, right?
Yeah.
You can have scientific analysis of witness testimony. There's a lot of scientific work that is done on bird migration, for example, and ecological uses, which is just people going out and seeing what birds are out, where, when, and tracking that, right?
And
well, and it's interesting because, like, in using the birding example, right, like the shadow people thing, like the shadow people become a bird that people are looking for and learn to identify. But the thing is that it's a bad identification, right? Like it's not a species, like it's not a not a thing. It's a phenomena. It's a phenomenal matrix that can be looked at, and it's an experiential report. But to say that there's shadow people, that like really becomes problematic, and I think the birding thing is so perfect because it does really provide a great model for how to go about that. You need to then figure out, like, well, what then are these different things that we're looking at that can be identified and teach people how to look for. The difficult shadow people, and you can make shirts,
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because even there they have a model. There's something called a bird breeding atlas that people do, and what you do is you have these codes for various behaviors. So I could see that, for example, carrying nesting material, or babies begging, or courtship behavior, singing on territory, all these things, which are associated with birds raising families in a certain area. But you could map that onto, so people that think they've seen a ghost or a shadow person, you could say, okay, was it a humanoid figure? Was it transparent or was it opaque? You could ask various questions that kind of drill down, and then you don't have to just rely, because I saw a ghost. It could be something completely from smelling the fragrance of your dead father, to seeing a light in the corner of the room, to, all these different things that people would label as ghost. But with a more rigorous, systematic approach, you can start to tease out these various impressions, including mental and emotional impressions that people had, or intuitive impressions, and capture all that data, and then be able to move forward from there.
Yeah, I was actually talking to a science writer from Canada, Patricia Pearson, for an upcoming Windbridge Afterlife Symposium. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the things that she was bringing up, because what she's been looking at is, deathbed experiences, right? Like, or immediately after death, sort of like, they're called grief hallucinations. But the idea that, people regularly report having an experience with a loved one or someone that they knew well, a friend or whatever, after they've passed away, and having these experiences. And exactly what you're describing, she was saying that one of the issues is that you have an experiencer report where they say, oh, well, my mother came back to me after she passed on. And you're like, okay, well, what does that mean? And they're like, well, I could smell her perfume.
Right.
Or, I was thinking about her and her favorite song came on the radio. Or, I saw an apparition. You know what I mean? So there's this wide swath of what it means for someone to say, like, my mother came back to me, and then how that kind of taxonomy and the ability to describe it accurately and to codify that hasn't been developed, despite the fact that these things are, incredibly common. It's an incredibly common experience.
Well, it also comes down to, like, there's people like us who are looking at this, trying to analyze the data, and there are people who just want this, like when they say that, they're looking for some assurance that their loved one is still alive. They don't really care about the data. You know what I mean? It's like, doing computer repair. Sometimes someone will call me and they'll be like, oh, my computer doesn't turn on. And when I get over there, their computer's on. And I'll be like, why? But you said it didn't turn on. Oh, it doesn't go on the internet.
Right.
Yeah.
And to me, those are two completely different things. But to them, it's the same thing. The computer doesn't do what they want it to do. It doesn't work. It doesn't turn on. The internet doesn't turn on. And it's happened.
You're lucky that they actually had it plugged in. I used to work for a point of sale software company. It's a terrible thing. Is your printer plugged in? And a half an hour later, okay, I guess it wasn't. But
yeah, anyway. I've had that happen too. But it's a very common one to have someone say it doesn't turn on. What they mean is it doesn't go on the internet, or it doesn't do this specific thing that they want it to do. But they just use this sort of general terminology to them. So now I've learned to ask, okay, when you push the power button, what happens? Nothing.
Right.
Okay, so it actually doesn't turn on. Okay,
No, that's a great example, because it's actually where I used to work, we'd have like these scripts or keys, right, that you would go through to identify the problem, right? Mm-hmm. Decision tree or decision, I forget what they call these things, but yeah. So you have like a script and you talk people through. These are the type of tools that can be developed for extracting some of this information and systematizing it out of these type of reports.
Right.
And what was I going to say? I was thinking about this too. because, talking to people about these type of things, like you're saying, it's this incredibly emotional experience for people if they've had a after death visitation or hallucination.
Sure.
And if you come at people in certain ways, they're just going to shut down. You're not going to get the information out of them. And I thought this is another thing about the multidisciplinary approach. You can have different people who have very different skills, even different beliefs, but they can all be bringing something to the table. Because I know that before, and I haven't read the book, before Valet and Harris's book Trinity came out, there's a lot of people that were worried about Valet working with Paula Harris. And I didn't really know her or her work, so I just figured, well, let's see what they have to say and decide. Right. But what struck me is that people were upset with Harris because they thought that she seemed kind of gullible. But I thought her role in this was she was talking to witnesses. And in that case, that openness to belief can really help draw people out and make them feel comfortable expressing fully what their experience has been.
I think one of the problems with her, though, I have not read Valet's book, but from people who have read it, they said that she asks a lot of very leading questions.
And that can be a problem.
Yeah.
And that is, again, another instance where training can be helpful. To get people to, understand how to extract information. For example, if you're in a criminal investigation, this could be very important, and that's why they record everything so you can see, were there leading questions? Did they give these people this information that then they fed back to them? And so it could be a false confession, stuff like that.
Yep.
But like I said, I haven't read the book. But the nut of it is that unless you get that information from people, you're not going to be able to do anything with it, right? It's going to be missing.
Yeah.
So I can see where, you can use, it sounds completely counterintuitive, but it can be beneficial in a certain way in extracting that information, getting that on the table, because unless we get it somehow, you're not going to be able to do anything else with it. Like try and find, run down like the physical aspects or other sightings, all that type of stuff. Another thing is that, and this is another area where I think that the esoteric models can be helpful, is in, David was talking about like a taxonomy of ghosts, or trying to get out what's happening with these things. Because in esoteric models, you will have these different levels of manifestation. So you could say, what was the physical or sensory experience that you had versus your intuitive impression? Then the other thing is that people that are sensitives or mediums or those type of people will talk about various different ways that you can receive psychic or paranormal impressions, right? So you can have, you can be clairaudient, hearing things. You can be empathic, where you're having like emotional experiences. You can feel physical sensations. And so they're used to kind of teasing all these things apart that way. So it's not like it's a completely unknown territory if you come at it from the angle of mediums and psychics. So,
right. Go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to say like that, in a lot of the sort of mid 20th century and early 20th century psychic training manuals, and that's one of the sort of intro chapter, like introduction to the book material, is dealing with the fact that there are multiple modalities for receiving the information and getting the reader comfortable with the fact that you may not have, clairvoyance, like you may not be having these visionary experiences, but you may be receiving the information through, just impressions, that could lead to thoughts that are slightly more on point than what they should be, or you may hear something or smell something. And some of the remote viewing training as well, it's getting people used to that idea that, there's many different ways that you can receive this information and start to process it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had, I mean, for me, I always compare it to like going down a road and I'm seeing a sign that is half hidden in the weeds that most people are missing. You know, it's like the information's there. It's just you're not open to it, or you're not looking in the right direction.
Yeah, and then how do you cultivate your awareness and your attention in a way that you can start to focus more on these impressions?
Yeah,
which gets us back into this. This seems to be less of an issue now overall, or at least there's more people that don't find it to be an issue. But especially like in the 80s and 90s, it seemed like, in the early 2000s, there was this idea that people that were repeat experiencers had to be like, drama queens or fantasists, or were very untrustworthy. And so the people that you needed to study were people who only had these one-offs. Now, of course, you spend any time looking into any of this, and that you have a ton of people that have a ton of experiences.
Yeah.
And fascinatingly, I found that when you have people that have a lot of experiences over time, and it really shouldn't be shocking, but they become more able to observe more precisely, and to be able to engage their attention with whatever's happening in a way that they're able to notice more and be able to convey it more clearly to other people. So I think that I'm seeing a little bit more, and I haven't looked into it in any, I don't want to say rigorous way, but it seems like there's more openness to listening to people who have had ongoing experiences over decades, and who may even endeavor to scare them up or precipitate them, which I think is encouraging, because part of the problem too is that, like UFOs and everything, there's these spontaneous phenomena. We don't know where they're going to show up. Like, for example, a tornado. And if people can actually get things happening to around where other people can observe it, possibly have some technology to bear to record things or analyze or take readings, that would be very helpful in trying to understand things. And it's, again, a role for citizen scientists as far as reporting where things seem to be happening, right? You need people on the ground for weather spotters and stuff like that to see, okay, what's happening with this tornado on the ground. You could have the same thing for, paranormal phenomenon as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting that with as much connectivity that we have now, there seems to be less cohesion than there has been in the past. I was looking at like a MUFON newsletter from the early 90s, and they were talking about setting up a ham radio like relay where they would have a specific time that everyone would sign on and would report from their local area and that. And I'm thinking about like Twitter and all this, and it's amazing that like back when, the amount of work it takes to get a ham radio license and do all that, that as a popular movement that people were coordinating and sharing information, or even before that, something like if you look at Gray Barker's They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, there's a whole section in there talking about early tape letters, where they would do reel-to-reel tapes, and they would send each other, you would send somebody a reel-to-reel tape with a letter on it. It'd be you reading, or talking to the person, and then they would record onto it and send it back. And, the amount of coordination that was going on with less connectivity, whereas now, just the cohesion is not there. It's really surprising.
There's almost too much connectivity, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah. And it's just surprising because like the National UFO Reporting Database, like that's still out there, that's still up. But I recently tried to look up like, well, what were the major UFO waves in the 20th century? Where were they? Like, what were their years? And are there any good like maps of them? And like, Googling for like an hour, it was really difficult to even get that. Like you could get maps of like, here's a fun animation of like every UFO sighting in the 20th century, like slowly popping up over time. But there was no data there. It was just a map with dots on it that like popped up. And I'm like, this is not helpful. And so there's a lot of like toys. There's a lot of like research toys out there, but actual useful, coordinated information in that doesn't seem to be as available.
Well, there's also the fact that you have this clickbait thing that happens where you Google something, you find 10 articles that are really just nonsense that are clickbait.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, this isn't useful. And then you click the next one, and you're like, there's no actual information here, And it's like this, because I've done that trying to come up with the stuff for the UFO history shows for the year. I'm like, what else happened this year? And you'll Google UFO sightings for 2020, and you'll get all this nonsense that doesn't tell you anything. And you're like, it's too much noise in the signal.
Yeah. The other thing is that, so I'm 59, so I was like in school, like in the late 60s and through the 70s, and people had more time back then.
Yeah.
And, people would work a 40-hour week, and you didn't have these huge commutes, and places were closed on Saturdays and definitely Sundays. And people didn't, there wasn't a lot of the same standard of living, I think, in a lot of ways, but there wasn't such huge consumerism, and there was just a lot more time. And I think people had a lot more time and free money to be able to go do hobbies. There was a lot more homes where you could have one person working and one person staying at home, and then your kids. And so I think that's a lot of it, is that people have to, just like the student loans these days and everything, it's crazy. And then you have these horrible retail jobs where people are working all, you don't know what your schedule is going to be like from one week to the next.
Yep.
It used to be really easy. It's like you could have like a evening meeting during the week, or a meeting on a Saturday or a Sunday, and, pretty much everyone would be free. So it'd be real easy for people to get together locally. So I think that's part of it too, on top of everything else that you guys were talking about. It makes it more difficult for people to get things done.
No, you're totally right. We have so much more technology, but yet we're pressed, we're spread thin that much more too.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's a shame.
Yeah, and that makes sense, Stephanie, for the way that the information in that is playing out is in these little little tiny like bursts, right? Like it's really easy to like throw out an opinion and like a link or whatever. But again, it's that lack of coherence, and that really fits what you're describing in terms of the changes in the culture. Like we're able to do a lot more little things that don't really have much depth to them, but to have the actual time and focus to engage with something and develop it just isn't there.
Yeah, it's a lot more difficult because people don't have the time, and then there's all these distractions as well. And it's let's see, might be a little bit racy, but it's hard too, because you do I have my blog, and just for me personally, in my blog and when I am speaking, I've had for a number of years a certain perspective and certain ideas that I want to get across. And so I'll put a lot of thought and care into how I like putting this show together, or a blog post or something. And it can be frustrating because you get, so I have to say, I've met a lot of wonderful people, and I've had great help from a number of people, like my friend Alex Boland, also Razor Wire Project Archivist, both been very helpful, Wham, in helping me get my ideas across. But it can be so frustrating sometimes when you have this blog post and, it just sits there and it gets like one like or something. And I was speaking with another young person who, we were talking about the difficulty of getting any type of attention for like serious ideas. And I was like, I feel like I should just post a topless picture, and over my nipples, I'd have 2 QR codes, one for my YouTube channel and one for my blog. And maybe people would go. It's like, I'm too old for this.
Or maybe a kitten holding up the QR code.
Exactly. I could have little Oliver, my chihuahua. But But it's the paradox of our times, right? You have this ability to have this great audience out there and reach all these people, but it's like how to do it. And then, also too, it's just, when you do put out something, I mean, it takes them time and attention to be able to engage with the material. And so anyone who's listening or has ever read my blog, thank you so much, because it really is a gift of your attention to, meet up with these other people in the imaginal realm and try and figure some of this stuff out.
Well, and you also got to figure most people are propagandized by this stuff,
Yeah.
So they're not interested in a deep dive. They think it's fun. They'll watch Ancient Aliens. They'll watch, Ghost Hunters or whatever, because it's fun to think about, but they're not really interested in taking a really intellectual deep dive in.
Yeah.
Or it just goes right over their head if they try to. That's the other thing. I mean, not everyone can kind of think on that level.
There's always a ton of things that are going over my head at any time.
Well, that's true of all of us.
Yeah. But hopefully, if we have a bunch of people working together, then, like I say, I don't even know how to construct this, but the idea that, we could manage to catch a bunch of things, even if they're going over most of our heads, someone in the group will manage to catch it.
Right, exactly. And that's why I like throwing speculation and stuff out there, because maybe that'll trigger someone else who will go, oh, hang on. And then they'll start thinking about it in a whole new way, because we're all, none of us are it's hard to say anyone's truly an expert on anything because we don't know everything, but no one's an expert on everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you never know. And I think it helps you to kind of keep you a little bit light on your, whatever the feet of your brain are. I guess it'd be your spinal cord, but it helps keep your thinking a little more flexible if you just kind of speculate or consider certain ideas, as opposed to always going to your, whatever your preferred theory is. So
right. I mean, Einstein came up with a lot of stuff he came up with just with thought experiments. What if?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I love a thought experiment because it kind of prepares you for possible situations out there in the real world that may come up.
Right.
How would you handle them? Yeah. Contingency planning. That's the word I was looking for.
You there, David?
I am.
Any thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, this, I don't know. It's interesting because we're on a podcast, and doing all these things and talking about this stuff. So I guess there is some sort of cohesion happening,
True.
Yeah.
And Stephanie, as you were describing your blog experience, like all the different people, and I know groups on Facebook and that are pretty, there's a lot of talk and collaboration that happens through that, Well, maybe I'm also reflecting the impatience of the time where I want it immediately, Yeah.
And if you look on YouTube, you look at a show like this, which has decent number of views, but then you look at some 10-minute video that's just nonsense. What's the word I'm looking for? Just nonsense stuff about aliens or whatever, and it'll have 3 billion views, and you're like, the hell, Although the funniest one, I needed a thunk sound for something I was doing, and I went on YouTube, and it's like thunk sound, and the thing had, I don't know, an ungodly number of views, and it's a 5-second thunk. And the guy who put it up is like, why is this going viral? It's a thunk.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, because I guess in the past, there was more, again, there was more intermixing of those realms, right? Like if you think of the National Enquirer, their UFO reporting was actually fairly good.
Really?
The headline may have been really sensationalistic, but they had people like Bob Pratt, who did a great book, UFO Danger Zone, right? About the UFOs over Brazil. That even has an introduction from Jacques Vallée in it. And, a lot of the magazines that were focused on UFOs were fairly tabloid and sensationalistic, but the actual reporting itself, intermixed both the sensationalism and kind of luridness, but also had some decent investigation involved in it. Whereas now it seems like that stuff's really separated out. Like the tabloid stuff is just straight tabloid, and the serious stuff is very serious.
Sensationalized is the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, that has to go. It goes to the stuff that started back in the 1980s with Lee Atwater and his ilk, where you started to have this marketing, not mass mail marketing, where they would really wanted to focus marketing efforts on increasingly targeted, for example, zip codes or parts of zip codes. This started out with, mailing advertisements in the mail that would go to your house. And so then people like Lee Atwater started to use the same information to drill down on political, what do you call like a portion of a population? Demographics?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so they could target advertising and material to very specific demographics that they thought that they could influence in the elections. They were very successful with it, and we have seen as computers have come more and more on board, as people are more and more involved with the internet and accessing their information through the web, that this has only increased more with algorithms that are showing you very unique, specific material, which is focused on who they think you are from your locality and your search results, listening or what you've been searching on the net, where you go, you have your phone with you and you go to Cinnabon, let's say, and suddenly you're getting ads for Cinnabon show up in your browser at home. I mean, all these type of things, it's just become more and more fractioning things. And the other part of what you were talking about, David, is that the budget for actual reporting has just, fallen off the edge of the cliff since the internet age.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's something you can see. You can track that with the current UFO media because, I mean, at least within the last year, it's like the same story. I mean, they're even like they can't get off the Tic Tac image.
Yeah.
It's like every story has that stupid Tic Tac image, and it's like, come on, can we at least just get some like hire an illustrator? Go on Fiverr.
Someone put a pie plate on a string and take a picture, so we don't have to look at the stupid Tic Tac anymore.
Something else, like go on Fiverr, hire an illustrator for $500 and just do something else other than that Tic Tac image, because they all have
David
it.
Metcalf, people, you can hire him. He'll make you a beautiful flying saucer.
My stuff's all scrawly and like cartoony, hire like Miguel Romero or something, Red Pill Junkie. But I mean, it's amazing because it's just like, the stories are all the same. It's like, this is what you need to know about the Pentagon report. Here's the exact same details that you've had in the past, like 12 things. And then the thing that's really upsetting to me is that then you'll get blog posts that are like, here, I'm going to analyze the situation with the exact same information. It's just like, stop. Yeah. Like, why does everything have to just be this repetition of like the five, I mean, they had one where it was like, and all the art, I mean, I showed this where, they're even recycling headlines from like the 60s where it's
nice.
Like, the first time the Pentagon has taken UFOs seriously, and you can go back to Look magazine in 1967, and it's, the first time the US government is taking UFOs seriously. And it's like, we're not even, you were recycling headlines from the 60s. And it's the same headline, which was supposed to be topical and like, this is fresh and new in the 60s. And you can't do that. Like, when now you're saying the same thing in 2021, like, that's not, there's some sort of cognitive dissonance there. But
well, I think everything's just propaganda at this point.
Yeah. And, so I work in marketing and communications. And one of the things with crisis response, in terms of, watching for when something happens that you're going to have to respond to. The news cycle, it's a machine, right? And the sad thing about the contemporary news cycle is it literally goes from like a Twitter post to a blog post to CNN.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's horrible because you can, if you follow that arc, you can see the information in the blog post as an outline, which gets expanded in someone's blog post, which then maybe gets picked up by like a higher level, like more coordinated kind of like blog or like, you know, quote unquote web magazine. And then from there it goes to CNN, and there's no additional information added in that cycle.
Yeah.
So CNN literally just goes and scoops off of things. You know, Vice is really bad with this too, where they just scoop up lower level, media and just rehash it up the chain. And it's because, you know, like you said, Stephanie, there's no budget anymore for real journalism.
No.
Yeah.
And this was the thing that really caught me with the Stephenville, Texas thing, was that Joyner was a local reporter doing her job and reporting on local issues. And then that filtered up and it got expanded in the news and got, you know, and there was, that was the cycle back in 2008, which isn't that long ago. But now, you know, you have, and you know, all these people popping up as investigative journalists, and it's like, you didn't go to journalism school. You never worked at a newspaper. You never worked at a magazine. Like, you had a blog and like a YouTube channel, and then you started writing for Vice. Like, that's not a real career trajectory.
Right.
You know? Not, like, that doesn't make you a journalist. Like, that makes you a blogger that like got lucky, and that, you know, which is fine, right? Like, I never went to journalism school, and I started writing and that kind of thing, but I would never call myself a journalist. You know, I mean, that's an actual like career that has skill sets and ways of doing it, and you know, there's skills in that. And yet, you know, how many investigative journalists do we have now? And it's just like, it proliferates. Yeah. And it's just, I think it's hurtful to, you know, and that's one of the things, I guess, going back to this multidisciplinary idea, you know, each person within that chain needs to actually be part of a discipline and have you know, not just be like a random person that, you know, and there's room within citizen science, you know, or citizen media or whatever, to have people come in who are enthusiastic and are capable of doing that, you know. But I think that sort of the roles have to be clarified in the fact that that doesn't mean that suddenly they're, you know, like a Nobel laureate, you know. I mean, right. Like unless you actually have the ability and the capability to stand up to that kind of model of the discipline itself, you know.
So we are just about out of time. You two willing to stick around and continue this in a Patreon segment?
Sure.
Okay. David, tell people where they can find you.
davidmetcalf.wordpress.com is my blog. It's not a web magazine, and I'm not a journalist. So you can find me there. I'm on Twitter as David B. Metcalf, and involved in all sorts of various things. So you Google me, you can probably find me.
All right. Stephanie, where can people find you and your blog?
It's Ghost Dog is a Mystery Box. It's stephaniequick.home.blog. And if you go to the contact page, I have like my Twitter is there, and I'm on Facebook. And I actually kind of am a random person on the internet. So but it doesn't stop me shooting my mouth off.
That's fine, as long as it's interesting to listen to. And it is. All right. Thank you both. I want to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons. Without you, this show simply wouldn't be possible. And I want to give an extra special shout out for those of you pledging $10 or more. Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Eric Hervin, Tim, 100th Monkey Project, Ad Noctum, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, Alfred Tuttle, American Rambler, Andy McNamara, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Cash, Charles Davis, Chris Ernst, Craig Cisternos, Greg Parmenter, David Moore, Denise Sarek, Diane B., Dominic O'Malley, Edu Camahort, MTK, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, J. Otto Bullitt, Will Gebhard, Paul Jeffries, James Lattimore, Joanna Rojas, John Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Christian L., Linz Jackson K., Luke Osborne, Stefan Javonisky, Jim and Sophie, Mark H. Brady, Matt in Delaware, Matthew Sproul, Maddie, Nagatha Christie, Patricia W., Ray Benedeno, Riker Stark, Roger Gonzalez, Sam Sharon, Sedgder, Stone Wilderness, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, 36 Dingo, Vincent Treewell, Walker, William Powell, William Lovelace, and Ren Collier. Thank you all so very, very much. If you're a patron, you'll get another hour of that conversation. And if you're not a patron, you can become one by going to wheredidtheroadgo.com and clicking on the Patreon link. It's only $3 a month. You get extra content all month long. And it really, really helps us out immensely. So if you like the show, that is the best way to support it. You can also support us by buying merch off the website. Again, wheredidtheroadgo.com. You can share the shows. You can give us a good rating on your favorite podcast catcher. All that fun stuff. And we definitely appreciate anything anyone does to help spread the word about Where Did the Road Go. I'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.